Next speaker is Professor Lucian Turcescu, already on second, I think, time participant in our symposium. It was at the time in Montreal. He has a little bit of change in his style of presentation between separation and establishment church-state relations in Eastern Europe. Professor Turcescu obtained a PhD in theology from St. Michael College, University of Toronto in 1999. In 1999, he started teaching full-time at Francis Xavier University in Nova Scotia, where he also became the chair of the Department of Religious Studies. In 2005, he joined the Department of Theological Studies at Concordia University in Montreal. Since 2010, he has been full professor and since 2011, chair of the Department of Theological Studies at Concordia University. His area of interest are early Christianity, religion and politics and ecumenism. Among his publications, Dumitru Staniloae, Tradition and Modernity in Theology, 2002, Gregory of Nyssa and the Concept of the Divine Persons, 2005, Religion and Politics in Post-Communist Romania, 2007, Church, State and Democracy in Expanding Europe, 2011. The last three published with Orthodox University Press. He also edited the reception and interpretation of the Bible in late antiquity, 2008. Please, Professor Turcescu.
I hope the screen is a bit tilted somehow. I don't know what we can do about that. We'll just take it from here. Let's hope it's going to be visible, especially at the back. I have been struggling in a way in my own scholarship to bring together the two areas of specialization. One that goes back to my doctorate, and which was Gregory of Nyssa, the Cappadocian theology of the 4th century, and my newer interests, which have developed in religion and politics, starting initially with Romania, post-communist Romania, and then the 10 former communist countries of Eastern Europe that are now part of the European Union. And I would have liked at this particular symposium to maybe give a presentation on similarities and differences between the time of Constantine, the 4th century, when the church was becoming legalized, and then by the end of the 4th century becomes the main religion of the empire, and the post-communist period, when the churches of Eastern Europe have come out of a period of persecution similar to the one that the church of the 4th century comes out of through the Edict of Milan of 313. But due to time limitations and the fact that my administrative duties have not really allowed me to delve a little deeper into the 4th century on this topic, I have chosen to focus on the period after 1989. And just before I delve into this issue, one area of particular interest for me has been models of church-state relations. And before I delve into it, I can say that there are clearly some similarities with the church of the 4th century. The churches of Eastern Europe, post-communist times, and 4th century, the Constantinian era. And one of them is how you deal with freedom. You have freedom to worship, you have freedom to manifest yourself, you are a legally recognized entity. And the church of the 4th century, the churches of post-communist Europe, whether Orthodox, Catholic, or Protestant, have similarly had to deal with this. Another issue is dealing with the past. And probably that is more so before you start to deal with the future. How do you deal with the past? How do you account for the fact that some people may have collaborated with the persecutor? Some may have denied Christ out of fear, out of opportunism. And this is a real issue in post-communist times, as it was after almost each and every persecution in the early church. The issue of rights that churches are getting that they didn't have under communism and they didn't have before Constantine, and how they get to be recognized by the political authorities. Another one is possibly the type of church-state relation in general. What kind of model are you going to develop? And at the time of Constantine, as Father Barringer mentioned, this bishop, Eusebius of Caesarea, who was somehow the court theologian, the official one in a way, has started working on this model of seeing the emperor as the representative of Christ on earth, that later developed in the East as the model of symphonia or harmony between church and state. By the time of Justinian in the 6th century, this model of harmony is worked out, and it has dominated Eastern Orthodox churches over centuries. And one of the questions I have, especially with regards to post-communism, is that model still viable? And as we'll see, as personal interviews I conducted with some of the hierarchs of the Orthodox churches are telling, they don't really seem to believe that the model of harmony like it exists in the Byzantine time is an appropriate one for post-communist realities. So without further ado, I'd like to jump into this, and definitely one of the differences that exists between the 4th century and the post-communist situation is that of secularization. There was no secularization, for sure, in the 4th century, and whether you were Christian or non-Christian, this reality didn't really exist at the time. So the churches of Eastern Europe, after the fall of communism, are faced with this reality of secularization, which is pretty prominent, has been pretty prominent in the West. But more and more, and this is the kind of the table of contents of my presentation for today, more and more important figures in social sciences in particular, who have proclaimed secularization as some sort of a dogma over the past century almost, are going back and questioning whether secularization is really happening. To be sure, secularization is this theory that says that as you modernize, the society secularizes, in the sense that the church will be pushed out of the public sphere and into the private sphere. And it goes back in the West to probably 16th, 17th centuries. And there are big questions right now whether it really was an appropriate theory, whether secularization occurs. So I'm going to talk about recanting secularization theory. We have an example of a famous sociologist who did that in the last 10 years. Others who are rethinking secularization theory, proposing to rethink it, and then looking at what has led to, in my research, to various models of church-state relations. Church-state separation, is that the model that Eastern Europe is embracing? Is that the model the churches in Eastern Europe? And then I'm going to mention briefly, due to time limitations, the findings of, especially the latest book I published with Oxford University Press, not Orthodox University Press. So, this is Peter Berger. He taught at Boston College. He's an emeritus, one of the major names in sociology of religion, who for much of the 20th century he was saying secularization is coming. Well, in 1997 he had this interview which is quoted widely, where he says why I and most other sociologists of religion wrote in the 1960s about secularization was a mistake. Our underlying argument was that secularization and modernity go hand in hand. With more modernization comes more secularization. It wasn't a crazy theory. There was some evidence for it, but basically I think it's basically wrong. Most of the world today is certainly not secular. It was very religious. And if you're wondering why he came to these conclusions, I'm just going to mention quickly, 1979, the Islamic Revolution of Iran. About the same time, the moral majority is being formed in the United States under the leadership of Jerry Falwell and cuts across confessional lines, bringing together Catholics and Protestants and Jews in this mobilization project, reclaiming America for God. And this, in a way, culminates towards the end of the 20th century with the various movements that were somehow apocalyptically driven, and perhaps it culminates with September 11. And these events have raised really serious doubts in the minds of many that secularization is happening. They saw religion rising, they saw religion coming back, sometimes in fundamentalist forms, but it was there. Other social scientists have joined this bandwagon of rethinking secularization more recently, but they are major names. This one, for example, Craig Calhoun was the past president of the Social Science Research Council in the United States, and now he's the director of the London School of Economics since 2012. He calls secularization the myth of the secular. He refers to it as the myth of the secular, and the myth in particular has these two components: the Peace of Westphalia, 1648, which brought an end to the wars of religion, which was a theory fully embraced by the field of international relations in political science, social sciences generally. And the other, the second strong part of the argument was this: religion is a domestic and private matter, going back to John Locke, Hobbes, and others, while international relations is a public matter. Craig Calhoun and others like him have started to question this, and he said, well, there were clearly some conflicts between Catholics and Protestants, but there was this war between the House of Bourbon and the House of Habsburg, both of which were Catholic, and it was a big war. The wars, the so-called wars of religion, were perhaps wars of taxation, of state building, and of national state building. He thinks that ignoring religion as a public matter, which is what secularization tries to, the theory of secularization tries to say, religion should be private, ignoring that would lead one to lose sight of the impetus for political reform. And he mentions in this context, in the United States, Christian socialism, seekers of New Age movement, civil rights movement founded in black churches, all of which would be pushed to the side if we just go fully with secularization. Moreover, he says culture wars in the US is basically a dialogue of the deaf between an impoverished secularism, which does not take into account the role of religion, and a resurgent political religion. And it's very dominant in the United States. We have our own Canadian proponent of rethinking secularization in the person of Charles Taylor, professor of philosophy at McGill University, and in his latest book, A Secular Age, which is about 500-600 pages, he talks about secularization narrative having been presented as subtraction stories. Religion, according to him, according to this secularization narrative, used to fill a lot of space that has gradually contracted while leaving everything around it untouched. In his view, religion is not something that cannot be discussed using rational argumentation. Religion is something like nationality, ethnic difference, he says. And he had a major series of interviews with none other than Jürgen Habermas, the major German philosopher. And Habermas was saying, we should still keep religion outside of the public sphere because religion cannot argue in a rational manner. And Taylor comes and says, what about when we talk about nationalism, when we talk about ethnic differences? Are those fully rational? And we still accept them for public discourse and for rational argumentation. And Taylor has contributed in major ways into rethinking this theory of secularization. I'm getting closer to the models of church-state relations that my co-author and I observed about Eastern Europe, and this, I have to mention the famous Huntington, Samuel Huntington, a major figure in the U.S. political science field, and he influenced American foreign policy for decades. His book from 1996, The Clash of Civilizations, is quoted widely around the world. In that book, he basically says the main idea is that the West is different from the rest because it has embraced the separation of church from the state. And he has in mind particularly the American example. Another major political scientist, Alfred Stepan from Columbia University, has argued against Huntington, and he proposed this theory of twin tolerations. I'm not going to read that whole quote there, but basically it says that church and state should tolerate each other mutually, and churches should be allowed to have a say in the public values, not just privately to be allowed. People should be allowed to worship, as secularization theory proposes, but publicly, they should be allowed to advance their goals in society as long as they play by the rules of democracy, basically, and they don't infringe on other people's rights. So Stepan has argued against Huntington and proposed this model that it is possible, and actually he gives a lot of examples. He says, well, the United States is indeed an example of separation of church and state, but there are so many other Western democracies which are not, starting with the Church of England, where the Queen is the head, where the bishops are members of the Parliament. They belong in the House of Lords, and they are lords spiritual. In Germany, where the state collects taxes for the Catholic and Protestant churches. In the Netherlands, where you have a lot of funds from the public purse going to finance, for example, health initiatives, hospitals that are run by churches, and where, of course, the state has to make sure that churches do not use discrimination in hiring processes, say only hiring Orthodox or only hiring Catholics. They have to be open to hire people according to the norms of those societies. So Stepan is one of the proponents who is really going against Huntington and at the same time speaking against secularization. And two other important political scientists that are speaking about government neutrality towards religion, and they also emphasize these models of church-state non-separation in established Western democracies are Stephen Monsma and Christopher Soper. For them, the goal, it's in a way another version of the twin toleration. They call it government neutrality, and governments should be neutral towards churches and towards non-church actors. Neutrality means, according to them, government neither favoring nor burdening any particular religion, nor favoring or burdening religion as a whole or secular system of belief as a whole.
Still 7, 8 minutes.
Okay. The models that Monsma and Soper talk about in Western established democracies, countries like the United States, France, for example, they embrace the strict separation model in which religion and politics should be kept separate from each other. In the United States in particular, no public money should go to fund any religious activities, any schools. There was even a case, a school wanted some funds from the government to hire a school bus. And the government said no, because you're going to take those kids somewhere to a camp and indoctrinate them. So no money from the public purse. In the meanwhile, the situation, especially this is because the Supreme Court has opposed and has understood the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, but also the wall of separation that existed is going back to 1802 in the United States. in a very strict way. No public money should go to religious activities. If you want to fund your religion, then do private fundraising, and that's your business. We're going to protect you. You can practice your religion, you're protected, your rights are respected, but don't ask for money. France had a similar model of separation. But countries such as England, Norway, Denmark, and Greece, which are established democracies in Europe, so we're talking established democracies by Western standards, have not embraced that. Instead, they embraced an established or semi-established model where, for example, the Church of England was the established church, the state church, so to say. Norway, the Lutheran Church. In Denmark, the Lutheran Church. And in Greece, the Orthodox Church. A third model that scholars have noticed in, again, Western democracies is the pluralist one, where society is understood as being made up of competing or perhaps complementary spheres such as education, business, the arts, family, but also religion and government. So these are actors who have equal claims to having a say in society. The pluralist model can be seen in the Netherlands, Germany, and Australia. Now, when you come to Eastern Europe, after 1989, this is my co-author, Lavinia Stan, and I were studying these topics, and we're looking for some theory to be able to work with and apply. We discovered that in Eastern Europe, the churches after 89 do not really want separation of church and state. There are very few who want separation of church and state as a working model of their relationship with the state. I'm going to mention there are some. I shouldn't just dismiss or eliminate this, but most of them do not want that. And we discovered basically three models which are in a way adaptations of the previous models I mentioned apply to the West. Somebody will probably ask the question, why do you take them from the West and move them to the East? I mean, there are reasons for that, and I can talk about that. So we discovered the church-state separation model, which I'll mention shortly, the pluralist one, and the dominant church model. It's not established, it's dominant. If the first one maintains separation between church and state, the second model brings them closer, while the third allows for considerable mutual influence between the two. The separation model is encountered in the Czech Republic and to a large degree in Slovenia. So we're looking at 10 countries, former communist, that are part of the European Union. We haven't looked at Russia, we haven't looked at Serbia and others that some of them don't even want to be part of the European Union, others are not yet. Czech Republic and Slovenia. Religion and politics are treated as distinct areas of human endeavor. The government remains secular. Religion is a private matter. No denomination is funded by the public purse, and no religion instruction is offered in public schools. Interestingly enough, I was talking to a scholar of Czechoslovakia, and he said, when Czechoslovakia separated in 1993, the Czechs, who are declaring themselves atheists, in like 70% of the population is declaring itself atheist. The Slovaks are Catholics in large numbers. And this person was saying, like, the Czechs could never really cope with the separation, with this breakup of their country, whereas the Slovaks took it like they found their identity in a way, and Catholicism was very much part of that rediscovery of their identity. The pluralist model, we encountered this in Hungary, Bulgaria, and Latvia, has society made up of complementary autonomous spheres like education, the family, and religion, each worthy of recognition and support from the state. The state treats all religions equally, or recognizes a large number of religious groups as historic religions which are important for the country. Religion is not part of the public school curricula, but students may enroll in extracurriculum religious education classes. And by the way, one of the main achievements of post-1989 religious groups in Eastern Europe was the introduction of religious classes in the public school system. as a way, they're explaining it as a way of really filling the void left behind by communism. And I think it has an impact in terms of the religiosity of the population. The dominant church model is the one found in predominantly Catholic Poland, Slovakia, Lithuania, chiefly Eastern Orthodox Romania, and Estonia, which has a large Lutheran majority, although there is a lot of atheism as well in Estonia. Government authorities informally maintain privileged ties with the religious majorities, and by sheer number and historical precedent, the churches within these nations command the loyalty of political parties, have a greater presence in public schools, and receive larger contributions from the public purse. So I'm just summing up. We found this interesting mix, of course, of types of models that churches are seeking in terms of interaction with the state, ranging from very few, actually only 2 tiny countries. The Czech Republic has remained really tiny after separate, embracing probably the French or American model of strict separation, but that's probably due to the large number of people who confess themselves as atheists. And then the pluralist model, where they are open to a lot of denominations. There is some support from the government for these denominations. And to the dominant church model, interestingly enough, none of the countries has an established church model. I mean, there were attempts in Romania, there were attempts in Poland to have the Romanian Orthodox Church declared the national church, which meant established church. In Poland, again, Catholic Church to be declared like that. But the parliaments, the politicians have never accepted this, although there may have been a historical precedent in the interwar period. The thing is that if you have an established church model like you have in established democracies, like England or the Scandinavian countries, things are different there. The democratic tradition is longer. And we don't know how exactly it's going to function in newer democracies, such as the ones in Eastern Europe. So, for example, instead of the established church, they coined this phrase, public utilities. Some of the dominant churches are referred to as public utilities, which is a weird term, especially in North America in English, because like in Quebec, you would say about Hydro-Quebec, the electric utility is a public utility. I was digging to understand what is the origin of this, and then Grace Davy from the UK is explaining it. It comes from the Lutheran countries, and the established churches there are referred to as public utilities in the sense that they are not private. They are not private businesses or private entities, and thus they have to have access to the public funds. So there is a bit of that incorporated into the legislation of some of the countries of Eastern Europe. So I'm going to stop here, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.